Alright, so this next topic might be a little bit controversial, and there's no right or wrong opinion on this. If you don't agree with me, that's fine. Just leave a comment below. And if you do agree with me, you can also leave a comment below as well. Whatever. So this is just speaking from the heart, from my experience lately, where my head's been the last few months. So I'm going to go back to when I saw Chris Kane play live. Now, he was playing a Les Paul into a Fender amp, and he had no effects pedals. And he absolutely rocked. It was so good. And that inspired me to kind of start being more selective with my gear and relying less on what I'm stomping on. So I got rid of my delay. I got rid of a few things. I kept an overdrive. And then depending on what amp I would take out, I wouldn't bring any pedals just to make sure my playing was at its best. And my focus was on my playing rather than where my feet were and what was on the ground. This is one thing I've spoken about this before. I felt like I had option paralysis for a while in terms of pedals, and I felt like it was pulling my playing backwards. I know when I'm playing at my best, which is only as good as it ever is, but I know when I'm at my best when I can make a PV Bandit on the drive channel sound great. Something also clicked while I was in San Francisco recently. I had a chance to play over there and I borrowed some gear. I borrowed an $85 Fender Deluxe Plus 112 amp, which I've done a demo of. I'll put a link up in the cards for that. And the guitar that was in that video was about like $100 maximum. If it was $100, I'd be surprised. It was an Epiphone Special 2, and it had 2 humbucker pickups. It was basically the cheapest Epiphone you could buy. And I managed to pull my tone out of it. I did have one of my overdrive pedals, and then I realized, you know what, I don't even need my overdrive pedal because this actual amplifier sounds good on the dirt channel. So it got me wondering about the whole law of diminishing returns. So that means the more you spend, the increment of better tone only goes up fractionally, or maybe not at all. I'm almost convinced now, for me to get my sound, if the guitar's playable and it feels good to play and it sounds good, it can be an Epiphone, it can be a Tokai, it doesn't have to be, a Gibson custom shop. And if I've owned a Gibson custom shop, I'm using that as an example, my tone and playing doesn't sound any better on a Gibson custom shop guitar than it did on the Epiphone Special, which was under $100. I think they're around 89 US, something like that. So they're pretty cheap. I was sort of like stunned. I got home and I'm like, man, I got all this nice stuff. And I've just come back from playing really cheap stuff that shocked me not only how good that was, but how I was still able to dial in my own tone. And I almost feel like gear is almost irrelevant. You got to get it to a point where either it can perform live or you can dial your tone in. The only person that's going to notice your tone is different are either other guitar players or yourself, and no one else is going to care. I pulled some of the best tone I've ever had playing this really, really sub $200 rig. It was fantastic. And the fact that you can just dial it in using your ear and, compensating for the pickups and all that kind of stuff in terms of where your EQ might sit on the amp, it's liberating to be able to play like that and just dial in a sound. One thing that keeps your tone consistent is a good pedal on a clean channel, and that's kind of how I like to roll. I took my overdrive with me, and it was a piece of cake for me to dial in that tone. Like I said, the amp overdrive sounded pretty wild as well, but now I know I can get my sound out of almost anything. I don't really feel like I'd need to go spending big bucks again on any expensive or boutique stuff, and that's just my personal opinion. I really don't feel like spending $3,000 or $4,000 on an amplifier is going to make me sound any better than even that $200 rig did. I really don't think it's going to make that much difference. It comes down to how well I'm playing. And if the guitar feels good to play, the action setup, this guitar played beautifully. It played as good as any of my other Gibsons or Tokai guitars I've ever played, and it was dirt cheap. I don't know if that particular guitar was like an anomaly or what, but I posted some live clips of me playing it, and I was just stunned how great it was to play. It felt awesome. So for me personally, whether I'm playing my PV Bandit on the dirty channel, a PV Bandit on the clean channel with my pedal, my Fender Blues Deluxe, or any other amp that I might borrow at a jam night or something like that, my sound will come through irrespective now. And I'm not boasting, I'm just saying, I know my tone, and I know, and it feels like there's not a whole lot of difference between any of these rigs. other than how much things are worth and how cool they might look. So it's just a little bit of food for thought. I really feel like for me, the law of diminishing returns kicks in at somewhere around $500 to $800 Australian, say $500 US if you can buy a good used amp for that price. Between that and say a $3,000 or $4,000 amp, there's not going to be that much tonal difference between them to get the particular sound that you want. Sure, if you're buying an amp with a different speaker configuration, that's going to make a huge difference. But if you're just trying to get your sound out of one amp with a 12-inch speaker and another amp with a 12-inch speaker, and you know your sound, you should be able to get a pretty wild sound out of it irrespective of what it is. And just remember, I'm not talking about junk guitars that are like $40 or those LD amplifiers that might cost, I don't know, $40 as well. I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm talking about once you get to a point, say a Hot Rod Deluxe versus a 2-Rock, or a Hot Rod Deluxe versus, something that's even more expensive. So that kind of ballpark. I know in Australia there are a lot more, but I'm using that as an example because I really don't feel like there's that much tonal difference between them. And then the sound you'll dial in is the sound you have in your head, if you have a sound in your head, and then it's usually pretty much the same. I'd give it about 5% between my good rig that I've got at home and the rig that I played in San Francisco. There wasn't a whole lot of difference in it apart from about, 80% increase in price.